Welcome to Heat Checks and Hail Marys. This is Mike Cagley. It's been a interesting weekend of Big Ten football, and probably because the Big Ten is so darn big, we didn't get a ton of clarity, but maybe a little sliver as to how the teams rank up amongst one another. We're going to try to determine a pecking order over the course of the conference season, but it seems to be the one thing that we know is that everybody is chasing the Buckeyes. That could change, but right now, that's clearly where we are as a conference. I'll try to rank the teams in tiers. I don't know that I'm confident in putting them in a stacked 1 to 18, but we can put them in tiers, and I'll do that later on in the episode. But let's get going right now. Our first heat check is the Illini didn't win, but showed well versus Penn State. Now, Illinois went into Happy Valley trying to defeat the Penn State Nittany Lions, but make no mistake, the Nittany Lions were massive favorites. So much so that Illini fans looked at one another and said, "What does Vegas know that we don't know?" And based on the game we saw Saturday night, we saw a competitive Illinois team that went in and showed fight against a Penn State team that simply had more athletes. The gap between the Penn State linebackers and interior and defensive linemen compared to their Illini counterparts was very, very wide, and it was evident on both sides of the ball. Despite this, somehow the Illini stayed in the game until the fourth quarter. The Illini committed lethal mistakes, mostly in the form of the errant snap to Luke Altmaier that resulted in the 9-yard loss that Caden Fagan somehow recovered. What followed was just as unimpressive. With the offense no longer having the threat of running the ball and being forced to go pass only, the Penn State defense geared up on that. The crowd noise was a factor as Illinois missed a 45-yard field goal after having a couple of penalties, including a false start on Illinois and an intentional grounding rule on Luke Altmaier. Now, I have to say right now that it was clear that that's where one of the receivers should have been, but I don't know that you can make that a judgment call because referees can't be forced to have to get into the mind of every quarterback when a pass goes incomplete. Well, was somebody supposed to be there? Well, maybe they were, maybe they weren't. Who knows? I thought it was a solid call. I could certainly see why it was frustrating to have it called if you're Luke Altmaier, because that's where the play called for the player to be at. But ultimately, it was the right decision by the referees. I think they had no choice but to call that. The Illini aren't good enough to win games where they lose the turnover battle and they get sacked 7 times. The good news for Illini fans is that many of these mistakes are correctable. The bad news is they're going to have to figure out how to improve the interior offensive line play and provide help to the interior defensive line. These aren't easy fixes, but you've got a coach who's a veteran and you've got a staff who's really good. They've got some time here in their off week to get that done. Somehow they did keep it competitive until the fourth quarter. They showed no quit, and they did that against one of the better teams in the country on the road at arguably one of the two worst places to play at night. I think you would probably throw LSU in there as well. But that massive crowd of over 100,000 people, all in white, making noise, it's an intimidating place to play. I think Illinois really had the opportunity to make this game close if they could have avoided the parade of errors that they had in the second quarter that prevented them from going up 14-7. But the Penn State defense played so well in the second half that I could still see, even if the Illinois Fighting Illini went in with a 14-7 lead at the half, I could see that game ending up 21-14 in the favor of the Nittany Lions. Bottom line is Illinois can't take a touchdown off the board due to their own mistakes. They have to make other teams stop them instead of stopping themselves. That was a tough but necessary lesson to learn. And I do think that good teams can lose even when they play well. Very good teams can win when they don't play well. The Illini are a good team, and so they have to play to their strengths, minimize mistakes, and take advantage of what the other team gives them. They weren't quite good enough to pull that off, but going into a bye week, that was a good lesson to learn. Now they have a couple weeks to improve and take out their anger on a Purdue team that humiliated them last year. This will be a big week for the Illini to rest and come out of this ready to go against the Boilermakers.
This is the Run My Own Business dream. This is the colleges paid for dream. This is the retire early dream. This is Busey, where your dreams and possibilities become moments through trusted guidance and expertise, through lifelong relationships. Because we're here to help you achieve the life you've always envisioned.
Now let's go to Hail Mary number 2. We're starting to see a little bit of difference in team tiers. As you look at the tiers, I put Ohio State in a tier all by themselves. They are the clear leader right now. They have a roster that is both extremely talented and deep. They look like they're a team that can resist injuries and have somebody to put in there when the starter is down. And that alone makes them a dangerous team. Then, when you add the overall talent, they are just spooky scary. The next tier is Penn State and Oregon. These are two teams that are proven contenders. The offensive coordinator at Penn State, Andy Kotelnicki, is getting improvement out of Drew Aller. They will need him to continue that improvement to challenge the college football big boys. The offense may not have enough if you can force Aller into a pass only situation. The best teams in the country are usually able to stop or at least slow down the run game. If you can do that and put a pass rush on Aller, I don't know if he's good enough to beat the best, but he is good enough to keep them solidly in this second tier. And I would expect Penn State to be in the CFP this season. Oregon is there as well. Certainly, they have excellent coaching. They've got a lot of team speed, and they are getting better each week. The one thing that you want, and Dan Lanning, I'm certain, is key in this, is to keep improving and keep getting better. You don't need to peak in October. Well, they're not in any danger of that, but they are getting better each week. And I think they are the second team in tier 2. Now, I split tier 3 into two different tiers. These teams would all be in one box. You can shake them up and see who you want to come out, but there's a couple different type of teams that at least I've categorized. Michigan and USC are two teams that were expected to be good. They have solid rosters, but they have flaws. Michigan's defense was supposed to be generationally good, and they have not been able to play at the level they were expected to. Some of that is because their offense isn't comparable to what they had last year, but there are other things that just makes you wonder where they're not clicking. They have plenty of time to get better, and I would rather play them sooner than later in the schedule because I think that defense will gel more and more as the season goes on. USC, on the other hand, has a good offense. They have the ability to put points up fast. Lincoln Riley certainly knows how to score. The defense is fantastic, and that is the difference for them this year. They are flying to the ball, they're hitting hard. At the same time, their offensive line, in terms of its ability to protect the passer, has its ups and downs. And I think Lincoln Riley's play calling can sometimes play him right out of a lead. So while Michigan and USC are very talented, they do have some things they have to work on. Now, the 3B, this is Indiana, Rutgers, and Illinois. These are three teams that are punching above their weight class right now. They are outperforming. preseason expectations. The crucial question is, can they keep it up? Indiana and Rutgers have a big advantage here. They have easier schedules than what Illinois has had. Illinois has just had 3 top 25 teams that they've played. They've went 2-1 against them. They still have Oregon. They still have Michigan on the schedule. They also play Rutgers. There's some talent that Illinois is playing. Indiana has a nice schedule, and so does Rutgers. Those 2 teams can stay in the fight till the end. But Indiana in particular has a nice schedule set up to make them be very successful this year. These teams would be my 3B. Now, if we drop down to tier 4, we have Iowa, Washington, and Nebraska. These should be bowl teams, and they may have the talent to move up. Certainly, Iowa's defense is always scary good. Washington has team speed. They went out to Rutgers, and the kicking game killed them. And Nebraska has a young, developing quarterback that each week seems to get better and better. So I look for these teams to potentially push to move into that tier 3. We'll just have to see what their performance is. Iowa's offense is definitely reliant upon the running back position. You wonder if they could ever get a good quarterback, what could be done. But then you also think, why would a good quarterback want to go there? But those 3 teams could make some noise. I don't think you want to fall asleep on them. We go to tier 5, Michigan State, Maryland, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Northwestern. Michigan State has certainly overperformed so far this season. They've done much better. Jonathan Smith is certainly proving himself to be a very good coach in year 1. Maryland has been a little bit of a mystery. They had higher expectations, have not lived up to it so far. Minnesota under PJ Fleck, it's just tough. The Big Ten is tough. I don't know that PJ has had any less effectiveness at coaching, but when you're out in Minnesota, you don't have as much NIL funds. It's not the easiest place to coach. I know Minnesota fans are getting a little frustrated. As somebody who lived there for 5 or 6 years, I would say take a look at coaches of the past. If you are going to get rid of PJ Fleck or you want him gone, try to figure out who's going to be better, because that is not a given. Wisconsin is in the midst of changing the culture. They are not the power team that they once were. Right now, their defense is not as reliable as it has been in the past. During a time of transition, it's a challenge. Luke Fickell is trying to evolve into a Louisville-like team here in Madison. I don't know if he can pull it off. He's a very good coach, but changing culture takes time, and you always have people who like the old culture. There are people who are my age up in Wisconsin who remember what it was like when most of the teams in the Big Ten in the 70s and 80s looked at Wisconsin as an automatic W. When they see the team not performing, they immediately fall back to, I don't want to go back to that. And trust me, folks, I understand. It's going to be a really challenging transition because Fickell's going to need to change that around quickly. People in Wisconsin are not going to wait around to bottom out and go back up. Northwestern is a team that did phenomenal last year. I was uncertain if they'd even win a game. They won 8. So they are a team that performed above and beyond. I'm just not certain that they have the horses, particularly on the offense, to do that again this year. They may be one that falls down a tier. I'm not certain on that, but we might see some degradation of that Northwestern team as the year goes on. Tier 6, UCLA and Purdue. Deshaun Foster is struggling out there, doesn't quite have the roster that he would like to have for a Big Ten. We're just going to have to see what he does as a new coach. Will he be able to keep this team together? Will he be able to attract talent? And during a season, can he make the coaching adjustments, him and his staff, that are necessary to help the team improve their results? That's not an easy thing to do. When you get into the Big Ten, even a bad coach is really good. So the other guys want to win very, very badly. And he is in a very tough position right now. And at Purdue, Ryan Walters is dealing with a team that doesn't have a ton of talent, and they're going to have to play good defense, and they're going to have to figure out how they're going to score points. It hasn't come easy so far, and Purdue fans are on the side of being impatient as well. They also understand you don't want to drop down to a lower level where they start having less and less recruiting, and now you have to dig out of a hole. It is nearly impossible in this 18 team Big Ten. It is tough, and you don't want to give up any time. So that he's got people who are getting a little bit impatient over in West Lafayette. He's got to fight through that. It's going to be a tough season, and if they finish near the bottom, I think it will be a time that will really test Ryan Walters and also the boosters. Will they stick with him? Will they give him the time? I'm not certain if you can expect a coach to turn things around in 2 years, but we're going to talk about somebody who's doing that here in our third Hail Mary number 3. Is Curt Cignetti and Indiana's schedule too good for the Hoosiers in the long term? Well, I have to share with you that Matt Stevens, the IlliniGuys football beat writer, warned everyone that Curt Cignetti doesn't worry about ruffling feathers. He doesn't plan on doing anything other than winning games at Indiana. And I have noticed that he has an almost Nick Saban like focus. At 5-0, Coach Cignetti is proving that Matt assessed his coaching ability with incredible accuracy. He's in his 14th season as a head coach. He's been at IUP, Elon, James Madison, and now Indiana. And over those years, he's accumulated 124 wins against only 35 losses. His worst, and I have air quotes, his worst 2 seasons, he had 5 losses in each season. He's never had a losing season as a head coach. And even more interesting is what he does in year 1 of his tenure. At IUP, he was 7-3. At Elon, he was 8-4. At James Madison, he was 14-2. And now he's 5-0 so far at Indiana. This isn't a guy who has the patience that allows him to wait to win. He just wins, and he does it right away. Let's compare the fact Cignetti has only lost 5 games in a season twice. If you look at Indiana's results over the last 30 years, obviously they're not good. But the Hoosiers have only lost 5 games or less 3 times since 1994. They lost less than 5 games in 2020. That was a COVID year. In 2019, which was a 5-game losing year. And in 1994 under Bill Mallory, which they lost 5 games. So you can already see that this is a total culture change for Indiana. And those fans are excited. And gosh, they should be, because this is something that they haven't got to see too often. And it is really fun. Cignetti is trending to have what could be the best first year for a Hoosier football coach since James M. Sheldon, who doesn't remember James M. Sheldon, went 8-1-1 in 1905. The schedule sets up well for the Hoosiers because, as we spoke earlier in the podcast, they have one of the easier schedules in the Big Ten. Hey, you get lucky. Some years you get the tough schedule, you get the short straw. Some years you get the better schedule, and you're like, this is great. Rutgers and Iowa similarly have an easier schedule this year. You have to make hay when things are good. And boy, you can watch those 3 teams to see how they improve as the season progresses. Those 3 teams have the opportunity to get even better. Indiana plays at Northwestern, at home versus Nebraska, at home versus Washington, on the road at Michigan State, at home versus Michigan, visiting the Ohio State Buckeyes, and then at home versus Purdue. Now, they avoided Oregon. They avoided Penn State. They avoided USC. They do play Michigan at home, and they have to travel to Ohio State. Nebraska's a solid team. Northwestern's one that will they or won't they? Can Michigan State live up to what they've done early? They're another will they or won't they team. And Purdue, I'm I'm afraid they probably won't. So you've got an opportunity where the Hoosiers could finish 10-2 or even 11-1 in the regular season. If they do that, that would be the best season in the history of the Indiana football program. If Cignetti's Hoosiers can put up a double-digit win season, which has never been done in the history of Indiana football, which athletic directors across the vast college football universe will be paying attention? Teams like Florida, they're just about guaranteed to be looking for a coach. And if you get the right coach at Florida, they win national titles. If you pick the wrong coach, they don't. But you get the right guy, Steve Spurrier or Urban Meyer, you're looking at the opportunity to generate national titles. What if Oklahoma thinks they need an upgrade to compete in the SEC? They were looking good under Venables in the Big 12, but now in the SEC, that's a tough league. Could they be looking for a coach? I'm not saying it's likely, but in these two big conferences, athletic directors are looking to win titles and what they can do to affect change to help their teams get better. Curt Cignetti clearly is the guy who will help teams get better, and you're not going to have to wait around based on his past history. The other team that I think is very scary, and people laughed at me when I said this about the basketball program, but Arkansas is becoming the NIL kings of basketball, and they have enough big business around that area in Arkansas with companies like Tyson Chicken and Walmart that they can compete with anybody if they can get those backers on board. Jerry Jones himself has said he'd like to help. I'd tell him to focus on trying to get the Cowboys good, but what do I know? But what would happen if you got a Curt Cignetti with his drive and the way he gets results with an NIL checkbook the size of Walmart? That's an interesting thing. I don't know if it'll happen, but you get a double-digit win season at Indiana, and it has to start going through some of those minds that, well, could we get better, and could we get better very quickly? I expect them to win at least 9 games this season, so write that down because some of my predictions go horribly awry, but I think the Hoosiers will go at least 9-3. They have a better team than any Hoosier team probably since the '80s. Cignetti is clearly an outstanding coach. The schedule makes it a good year for this team. Does he use a generationally good season to launch himself upwards to the highest stratosphere of coaching jobs? I don't know Curt Cignetti, but I can tell you one thing. In college football, when you're at a program that doesn't win as much as other programs, and you would like to move your career in an extremely positive direction, it's usually good when you do well to move up to that next level if you get the opportunity. I don't know what the heck's going to happen, but I think it's going to be a heck of a journey to find out. Thank you very much and keep moving upward until our next show.